welcome back to HR with Love. I'm Rahana Latif, and in today's episode, we're talking about leading with love through diversity, equity, and inclusion, a commitment to well-being and truly shaping the future of inclusive workplaces. I'm really pleased to have Desiree Goldey with me. She is a leader in talent and culture, founder of Do Better Consulting, and author of The Inclusion Effect. She's helped organizations embed DEI at all levels and build inclusive, people first workplaces. So, Desiree, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a real pleasure.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Desiree, your work is truly inspiring. So, what first sparked your passion for DEI and what continues to drive you in this space?
I thought about this really hard because I feel like it should just be a natural thing that it was a passion for me because of who I am as a person. I'm a woman, I'm a career, I'm a talent leader. Those should just naturally drive you to care about diversity, equity, and inclusion because we work in predominantly white male spaces, right? So it really wasn't optional for me if I really sit down and think about it. But I also found that when you work in these spaces, the culture either encourages you to thrive or it diminishes your willingness to participate and innovate and do all of these great things that you could be doing for organizations. And so I get excited when somebody says to me, I would like my employees to feel more included, or I want them to feel like they belong here in the workplace, because that makes for better cultures. And so it continues to drive me to do this work when people come to me and ask me these questions, such as yourself, right? Because I do think we get to this place where, the status quo seems okay. And that's what DEI stops you from doing is letting the status quo just it's been a journey though. The work is hard.
You make it look so easy and you're so passionate about it.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. It's been a journey. Let me just say that. And with the current climate, it feels a little wonky right now, but we'll get back on track.
Desiree, you've helped teams bring DEI and well-being into the company culture. How can organizations actually embed both?
I think that we need to stop treating DEI and well-being as separate HR kind of buzzwords. If your culture doesn't value belonging, no amount of a wellness app or a program is really going to get you to the finish line. And so, having equity and promotions, constant communication with your employees, really embedding it into your organization is so important. I think people think that DEI and well-being and equity and all of these things are like these little puzzle pieces. Well, I say it's one puzzle. Let's get it all together. Make sure that you're funding those systems that get you to the finish line and start building infrastructure around it. They aren't just words we say just to sound cute on a website. We need
No,
to
we got to believe it and you've got to implement it. And I think you're
yeah.
absolutely right. Having that umbrella where you actually believe it and implementing it, but also echoing it from the C-suite. It's got to
Yes.
come from the
Oh,
top.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I've said for a long time that DEI is not a department, it's an organizational thing. So when we started creating these chief diversity officers and all these like one-off people doing work for these huge organizations, I struggled with it because to me it's a leadership initiative that is supported by many departments and should be influenced. DEI should be an influence over all departments. And I think that's why we've struggled to get it right in the past.
I think you're absolutely right. And if it's not filtered from top to bottom, it's never going to work. We won't be able to get what you're trying to implement, which is a happy, diverse, inclusive culture where people really enjoy going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I
We are
couldn't have said it
aligned.
better myself.
No, I think you could, and you have. So, Desiree, with the rise of hybrid and remote work, how can DEI and well-being within organizations really work then? Because there is a rise.
I mean, I do think that in a remote and hybrid team, first of all of this starts with talent, right? So who you're bringing into the organization, how you decide what qualities and values you're looking for to build that organization. To me, that's the start. And I think sometimes we're still not getting the talent part of this, right? And so it shouldn't feel like in these remote and hybrid teams where we feel disconnected. If you're doing the evaluation of that talent correctly in the beginning of the process, to me, some of this kind of fuels itself out on its own. But then you have to have those, and I do believe in programs. So I do want to go back to the fact that I do believe in them. But you have to have those connective tissues that keep those employees feel like they belong, even though they're nowhere near you. And that's a difficult, and I think some organizations do it really well. My organization does it very well. I think there are other organizations that still struggle with this, where people don't feel like they belong, and so they end up leaving. And this is, for leaders, and I talk about leadership all the time because I do believe as leaders, the empathy part of working with a remote team and hybrid team and flexible schedules and things like that is so important. And also those one-on-one connection times. A lot of leaders still don't do one-on-ones with their teams, still aren't asking them how they're doing, how they're feeling about the organization. Those are questions that we should be asking all the time.
And I think that's really nice because when you actually take a genuine interest in employees, they feel a sense of belonging, they feel valued, they feel heard, and they feel invested in the company and they don't want to go anywhere because of
Right.
those intrinsic feelings that they have.
If I could tell a leader anything, it's would you just stop and listen? That would be like my biggest advice in the world. Just stop and listen to what your employees are saying and how they're feeling, because that'll influence a lot of your decisions, and it'll also stop that, retention and attrition that's happening all the time in your organization.
I'm going to hold on to that thought because we're going to come to it shortly. Desiree, what's the biggest DEI challenge that you have faced? And how would you advise organizations that are going through the same?
I think first let's start with the hardest challenge. I think my frustration is watching organizations who have, these lengthy DI statements on their website. And they have these, they say they support DI, but when you get into it, there's nothing really meaningful behind it. And it's a very performative type of DI, where, it's more about putting butts in the seats for quotas than it is about actually supporting people, and providing them security and equity and the things they need to feel feed their families, all of those things, right? I struggle with it. And it, for me, at one point made me almost leave trying to talk about this work, because it was so rampant. And so for the advice I have goes right back to that statement, is that you need to fund this work. First of all, most DEI programs, ERGs, things like that don't get funding, right? You can't do work without funding. It's just not possible. So it's crazy to me when you put somebody in the seat to do this work and then you say, well, you have no money to do anything. You're just going to go run, talk, and train people. That's so performative, and it doesn't work. The other thing, is start measuring and surveying your people, because that means more than just the head count number. right? Well, who's in the seat, what ethnicity is in the seat doesn't really matter. How that employee feels in that seat is the important measurement that you need. And we don't do enough of that as well. We're not looking out and saying, oh, we need to survey every once in a while to see how employees are feeling and doing, or communicating back to leadership. And then some of that, even when we're measuring it or taking those surveys, there's no action after that. It's just like this blanket survey, and which is why people don't fill them out half the time, because they know nothing's going to happen. But progress, I always say this too, progress is uncomfortable. And if you're not uncomfortable with progress, it does mean tension. So you have to be uncomfortable sometimes doing these things, but it'll get you to the right result. But uncomfortability is actually a good spot to be in sometimes because it means that you're challenging what's happening.
If we don't have a happy culture where people do feel like a sense of belonging, where they're not going to stay for long and we'll have a high turnover of staff, and it
Yes.
costs a lot more in recruitment fees and recruiting. That whole process is so exhausting, which I'm sure you found as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just the cost of losing an employee today in this world is enormous. So why not build a culture around where they want to stay? It just makes no sense to me.
As we're talking about leading with love and creating inclusive workplaces, what's one meaningful advice and action that you would give to leaders to ensure that their people really feel like they belong and they want to go into work?
Leading with love to me starts with listening. So, and not performative listening, that kind of listening that makes you kind of uncomfortable in your seat, right? Getting real feedback and listening to that feedback and then providing action on that feedback. And so it's not just getting the feedback, it's being ready to act on the answer that you get back and not just, putting it as something they just said and you're like moving on. Really take it to heart, and understand that that person feels that way and you want to address it, acknowledge it, address it, and then provide action to that. And because belonging isn't like a cool vibe. It's a result of consistent communication and intentional leadership. And that takes time. And by the way, I think that most people or leaders do not know how to lead with straight intention and intentional leadership. And so that's a skill set that develops over time. I've seen some great leaders do this really well, but most leaders aren't trained to be in the seat most of the time. And so they don't know how to do this really effectively. And I think if they could just hone in on their listening skills and actually then providing action, because that's where the accountability comes in.
But I think we're all work in progress. And if you can acknowledge that everyone there has the same goal, which is to have a happy culture, and of course, every day it's not going to be happy, but where you instill those values throughout, where people do come first, and you do have the benefits of them coming into work, enjoying it, and having those one-to-ones. Like, it's amazing what a Monday one-to-one remotely can do for an employee.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing the results you see. It really is if you look at the surveys and the stats that we've seen in data from so many people.
Well, they do say diversity of people gives you diversity of thought. And I think it's so important to have people from all around the world, shapes and sizes, and really celebrate that because what you know, I don't. What I
Right.
know, you don't. So we're unique in our own way.
It's a beautiful thing when it all works out and you get that like real think tank with all these diverse thoughts happening. That's where the magic happens.
Desiree, for everyone that is listening, before we close, what would you say to anyone?
I hope that people take this message to heart, and if they want to do this work, know that the work is hard, it takes long, but it's worth it. And in the end, you get more productivity, more innovation, more happier employees, and you actually see profits rise from this. So please think about doing this work and in doing it with intention.
It's been an absolute pleasure for you to share your insights, your experience with all of us, and you've given us golden nuggets. So, everyone, as we end, until next time, let's create workplaces where people are seen, heard, and valued. Lots of love from London. Bye for now.